Hey guys, my name is Adi Osmani and welcome to CSS3 in under 5 minutes. In today's screencast, I'm going to teach you some of the core new concepts in CSS3. We're going to do this through an evolving example, where we take a CSS2 button and turn it into a crisp CSS3 button that looks just as good as anything you create in Photoshop. So let's get started. On your screen at the moment, what you'll see are two buttons. One of these was created in Photoshop, and the other one was replicated by me in CSS3. Can you tell which is which? I can't, so I decided to add a nice hover case to the CSS3 one. Now let's see how we can actually create this from scratch. We're going to take the simple CSS2 button you see over here, which is made with just some padding and a background color, and step by step we're going to turn it into what you see below over here. Now the first thing I noticed different about the button on the bottom is that it's got some nice rounded corners. Now how do we add this to our CSS2 button? We use Moz border radius, WebKit border radius, and border radius. This basically just defines the CSS3 for Firefox, Safari, and Chrome, and then any other browser that supports CSS3. And when I turn that on, as you can see, we've got some nice rounded corners on the button. The next thing I notice is that this text has got a nice little indent effect on the very top of it, which makes it look like it's depressed. So how can we achieve that? We do this using the text shadow property in CSS3. Now what does this all break down into? Over here where you see HSLA, that means hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. And it's basically a new way of you defining a shade of a color in CSS3. What are all these other parameters? Basically, it's the x-coordinate of the text shadow relative to the text, the y-coordinate relative to the text, and then the blur radius of the text shadow, which means the amount of space the shadow text is stretched, which causes a blur effect. This works fine in both Safari, Chrome, and Firefox. And I'm also going to change the background color and make it a little bit more like the button we have below. And this is what it looks like when I've updated it. The next thing I notice about the button on the bottom is that it's got a nice linear gradient. So how do I achieve that in CSS3? Well, there are two different commands you can use. WebKit gradient for Safari and Chrome, and Moz linear gradient for Firefox. Now, in WebKit, what you have to do is, first of all, tell WebKit gradient that you want to use a linear gradient, and then you define some points and a color stop. So what does all this mean? Well, the points here, so left top and left bottom, are it's a pair of space-separated values, and that syntax supports numbers, percentages, or keywords like top, bottom, left, and right for the points, and it basically tells it where the gradients are going to be positioned. Next, for your color stop is basically a function that takes two arguments, the stop value, which is either a percentage or a number between 0 and 1.0, and a color, which is any valid CSS color. And that basically allows you to say, well, I want to go from one color to this next color, and you can define how much of the first color it's going to take before you hit the next color, so you're able to define linear gradients in that way. The Moz linear gradient is somewhat similar. You define your positions, you then define the color that you want to start with and the color you want to end with, and it's quite simple to use. So with those enabled, let's see what it looks like, and we're getting much closer now. For anyone that needs it, remember that there's a website called gradients.glrzad.com. It's a nice CSS3 gradients generator in case you need a nice quick way of creating compatible color combinations. The next thing you'll notice on this button below is that you've got this nice depth effect that makes the button look like it's actually raised. Now we're going to achieve this using box shadow, a CSS3 box shadow, which basically gives your element, such as a div, a shadow. It accepts a number of different parameters. It generally accepts horizontal offset of the shadow, which means the shadow is going to be on the right of the box. A negative offset will put the shadow on the left of the box. It accepts a vertical offset, which means a negative one is going to position on the top of the box. A positive one will mean that the shadow appears below the box. You can then specify a blur radius, so if the blur radius is set to 0, the shadow will be sharp. The higher the number, the more blurred it's going to look. And you can also define a spread radius causing the shadow to grow. Now, if you decide to use inset, which you'll see here, I'm using inset, the present of the inset keyword changes the shadow to one that's inside the frame, so as if the content is depressed inside the box, which is the effect that we want to achieve. Inset shadows are drawn above background but below border and content, which is why you can see this effect being achieved right after the border to this particular button. So it looks like it's actually being raised. And similarly, you use WebKit box shadow, Moz box shadow, and box shadow to achieve this. And I'm chaining these to define there are four different corners of this button. I want to define the effects for each one of those. And I can achieve that using chaining and box shadow. And when I run my update, I have this nice, beautiful looking CSS3 button that looks just as good as the Photoshop version. Now, in part 2 of this tutorial, I'm actually going to teach you about transforms in CSS3, but if you've enjoyed this one, I hope you retweet it, and thank you.